I'm Rantasmo, and Kaboom needs more gay. It's been a while since I talked about Gregg Araki, but I have to say that his 1997 film Nowhere is still one of my all-time favorite films centered around queer themes. I actually like it even more than Mysterious Skin, which is a lot more polished and critically acclaimed and takes itself a lot more seriously. Nowhere is weird and funny and tragic and violent and sexy, and it has aliens and Sharon from My So-Called Life hanging out with Dana from Step by Step, and they have matching shirts, and I love it. While it's technically not a part of Araki's Teenage Apocalypse trilogy from the 90s, the 2010 film Kaboom shares pretty much all of the same central themes. It has teens, albeit college-age ones this time, and it most certainly has the apocalypse, not to mention plenty of queer sexuality. But it doesn't have quite the same magic to it. Kaboom concerns a college freshman of undefined sexuality named Smith, played by Thomas Dekker, who has strange, cryptic dreams of dumpsters, lusts after his straight roommate named Thor, hangs out with his acerbic lesbian BFF Stella, and gradually becomes pulled into a bizarre conspiracy involving men with animal masks, an underground cult that believes that Smith is some sort of chosen one, a murder mystery, supernatural powers, and nuclear weapons. Much like Araki himself, Smith has relationships with both men and women, but shies away from labels like bisexual. It's kind of nice to have a protagonist who is undeniably queer and who openly discusses LGBT identities, but doesn't easily fit into any of them. That's not to say that Kaboom is an especially deep exploration of sexual identity.
What are you doing? What's it look like I'm doing?
But Smith does serve as a decent representation for queer and questioning audiences, and as a demonstration that these things aren't always so simple. But what's particularly striking about Kaboom is how normal it is. I mean, yes, there's plenty of weird, campy imagery, and it meanders a lot, and there are a few subplots we probably could have done without, but everything ultimately ends up tied together by the end. A lot of people have drawn comparisons between this movie and the work of David Lynch, but Kaboom eventually explains itself way more than anything Lynch has ever done. But it's that explanation that makes what happens next all the more frustrating. It's really difficult to talk about Kaboom without talking about its ending. So, one last spoiler warning. This is how Kaboom ends. Okay, so ending your movie with the world abruptly exploding and everyone dying is not a universally bad choice for an ending. It all depends on the type of movie it's been up to that point. Nowhere actually has a very thematically similar ending. Also, I'm gonna spoil the end of Nowhere here, so be warned. Nowhere ends with an insectoid alien bursting out of the body of the main character's love interest. It's abrupt and messy and kind of stupid, but it also has an emotional impact, and more importantly, it fits perfectly within Nowhere's non-structure. Nowhere has no particular plot to speak of, and it's full of bizarre non-sequiturs and seemingly random meaningless tragedies, so when this happens, it's barely even surprising. But by comparison, Kaboom's story up to its conclusion is much more cohesive than any of the movies in the Teenage Apocalypse trilogy. It has a structure, sort of. It's a weirdly paced structure, but it feels like it's actually going somewhere and building up to something. There's this massive info dump near the end of the movie that I'm not going to get into the details of, but it more or less explains what's going on and solidifies the stakes and the characters' motivations. So when it seems like the final act is just about to begin, and then this happens, it just feels like Araki is trolling us. And maybe that's supposed to be the point? Like maybe it's trying to satirize hero's journey narratives by having the so-called chosen one fail to save the world before he even gets a chance to try, but it just ends up feeling like a waste of what could have been a coherent, halfway decent story. So it's not so much the ending itself that bugs me, it's that the movie makes too much sense to justify it. I'd say that Kaboom is worth a watch, but it definitely didn't live up to my expectations. I still really like the idea of a sci-fi conspiracy thriller with a queer protagonist. I just wish we could have one that doesn't abruptly end just as it's about to get interesting.